Egypt Covington had everything. She was a popular singer in Michigan. She just landed her dream job, bought a new car, and was dating the man of her dreams. All of that was taken away one summer night when she was in her apartment alone, watching a movie. Egypt was in the right place at the wrong time, and all of her dreams were ripped away. Hi everyone, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Kimbyrleigha. If you've never been here before, nice to finally meet you. Before we get into the story for today, I just want to mention I have been going above and beyond for the sponsors on this channel. It means so very much to me that these brands trust me to try their products, talk about their products, and also that they will sponsor this channel and the content because we need it. It allows me to keep doing what I'm doing, so I am so very thankful for each and every sponsor on this channel. With that being said, I would love you to watch my video that I made for this sponsor today, Shaker and Spoon. So I hope you will stay tuned and watch this part of the video. So I've tried a lot of subscription boxes, and I've got to say, this is by far my absolute favorite. Shaker and Spoon is a monthly cocktail subscription box. It comes with ingredients to make craft cocktails at home. Just add your favorite alcohol. Shaker and Spoon makes it so simple to create unique and even complex drinks with easy to follow recipes created by world-class bartenders. 3 original recipes come in each box. They even give you links to videos that you can watch to improve your techniques. Look at everything that's inside. It comes with enough ingredients to make 12 cocktails, 4 from each recipe. You get all the syrups, the bitters, aromatics, which I personally think are pretty cool looking, the garnishes, and more. I like that I don't have to buy full bottles of all the ingredients, especially the hard to find ones, before I know if I'm going to truly like the drink. Instead, I can discover new drinks right at home. I'll admit, I've always wanted to learn how to mix up a tasty adult beverage, but I get intimidated by all the steps. It's just too overwhelming for me, so I've never tried before getting this box delivered to my door. Each box is themed around one type of liquor, and I chose tequila this month to go with the Añejo Let's Go box. And that's the drink I'm going to be making today, and it was so much fun. I invited a couple of my friends over to test out my new skills, and there were moments I truly felt like I was a real bartender. But clearly, I'm not. But still, look at me go. Everyone agreed that I did a really great job. Everything was so easy to understand. It's almost foolproof, and I was truly impressed with how good the drinks looked, and of course, how they tasted, especially without much effort, which is perfect for me with as busy as I am with researching, scripting, dropping things, filming videos for all of you. And I wish all of you could taste one of my creations for yourself, but since you can't, I will make a toast to every one of you watching and to Shaker and Spoon for helping me get excited about trying new things without having to leave my house and spend a bunch of money out here at expensive bars in LA. So it's like bringing the bar into my kitchen. It introduces me to new spirits and flavors that I may never have discovered. So cheers to all of you. That's good. That's delicious. Try it. I know you'll love it. Just click the link below and use the code Kimber at checkout, or go to shakerandspoon.com/Kimber for $20 off your first box so you can impress your friends or yourself with your new cocktail making skills, having everything you need delivered right to your door. Once again, that's shakerandspoon.com/Kimber, or check out the link below in the description box and use Kimber for $20 off your first box. All right, now let's get into the story for today. I wanted to give a big shout out to my friends at Tapazon. That is whose bar that is. Tapazon is a restaurant in El Segundo, and the owners, Eric and Almir, let us film there. So thank you guys so very much, and you should definitely check it out. I'm going to put it down below and show it to you right on the screen. It is an amazing restaurant and bar. Go there all the time, really like it, and I'm so very thankful that they let us kind of come in and do our thing for Shaker and Spoon. Thank you guys both so very much. I really appreciate it. Okay, now let's really get into the story for today. I want to introduce you to a girl named Egypt. Jacqueline Elizabeth Egypt Covington was born July 19th, 1989 in Michigan to her father, Charles Chuck Covington, and her mother, Tina Marie Turner Covington. Egypt had a very big blended family, lots of step and half siblings. Her parents, Chuck and Tina, divorced when she was young. but she maintained a very close relationship with both of them, as well as with all of her sisters and brothers. Now, I tried to keep track of each and every one of them, and from what I could gather, there were 3 other girls in the family, Jordan, Beth, and Jessica. And Jessica was very close in age to Egypt. I found a really cute picture of both of them from Halloween as children, and they look like twins. I also counted 3 brothers, Dewan, Samuel, and Dwayne. And yes, I'm pronouncing that correctly, the way that he pronounces it, Dwayne. Egypt was a name that Jacqueline chose. That is how her family and her friends knew her. Therefore, I will be calling her Egypt as well. Her dad, Chuck, remarried to a woman named Kristen when Egypt was around 12 years old. Egypt was very close to Kristen, who was also known as Chris. Very close family. They had a lot of fun together. I looked through hundreds of photos of this family on Instagram and Facebook, and I have to say, they really remind me of my own family. I am from a big blended family as well. And this group of people, I could see myself having a lot in common with. They just seemed to be people who were accepting and loving and supportive. And one thing that Egypt's whole family and all of her friends were supportive of was her passion for singing. This woman was born to sing. Her voice gave me chills. Her voice would resonate through a room and touch each and every person there. She moved people with her singing, and she was going places. The people around Egypt didn't have a doubt. They knew that she was going to be famous one day. It was just who she was. She was absolutely gorgeous as well, and very unique. No one else has what Egypt did. There was just something so special about her. When I looked at pictures of her, I could feel it. Her smile, those soulful eyes, her face, it just told a story, and she didn't even need to speak. And if you watch my videos before, or you've watched any true crime videos, I'm sure you've heard people say the same things over and over again. Their smile lit up the room, it radiated when she walked in. Well, guess what? I'm going to tell you that of all the cases I've done, where I've heard people describe the way a woman carried herself and how people reacted when she walked in the room, I can tell you everything that they say was true about Egypt. You could feel it through her photos. She had one of the biggest and brightest smiles. So genuine. And as I was going through everything, researching this case, and trying to find out who Egypt was and what people said about her, time and time again, I would read the same thing, that she was the type of person you could not take your eyes off of. It wasn't just the way she looked. She didn't even need a microphone. She was one of those people that just commanded a room because she had a big personality. And that personality would fill the room before she would even get into it. When she made that presence, people would flock toward her. They wanted to be around her just to get some of that energy for themselves, just to feel it. So it's probably no wonder she found herself in a job where she could use a personality like hers. She followed in her big brother Dwayne's footsteps and became a bartender alongside him. It was one of her first real jobs. Dwayne taught her the ropes. They would even have this little show that they would put on together where they were side by side behind the bar. He taught her all of his tricks, and I'm talking, they would come out there, dim the lights, throw flaming bottles of liquor into the air. And it was fun. It attracted regulars to the bar that would come to see them time and time again, to see Dwayne and his sister Egypt. But a lot of people say it was mostly for Egypt. She was the star of the show, not only at the bar, but on stage. Egypt would frequently enter singing competitions, like the one she did in 2014 at the Country Idol. This is a really popular competition in Eastern Michigan, and she was so confident on stage. It wasn't even confidence about her ability to sing, that she was the best singer. It didn't matter. It didn't matter if she sounded good or if she didn't sing well that night. She was going to sing. That's what mattered. She was going to own it. I really love that there are so many pictures and videos of Egypt to show you, because one of the most important things when I'm telling you these stories is that we remain to focus on those who lost their lives, to honor their memories. And I found this video of Country Idol, and I just want to tell you, Egypt rehearsed for this performance, but when she got there, unfortunately, the DJ did not have the music for the song that Egypt already prepared for. And I know a lot of people, some of us, maybe me, we'd say, okay, you know what? That's a sign. I'm out of here. I don't want to do it anyway. I'm not going to do it. I'm just going to bow out gracefully. But that was not Egypt. One of her really good friends, Nori, said that her and her sister went into the hallway with Egypt, and they basically picked a song right then and there. A song you'll probably know and recognize because I really like it. I don't know if I can play it here on YouTube, but I want to play you a clip. So she grabbed her sister and her friend Nori. They went into the hallway and she told them, okay, we have 10 minutes. Help me do this. And that's the kind of person she was. She was not going to let something like that stop her. I'm going to show you part of that performance because it is a good one, especially knowing that this wasn't even the song that she planned to sing. And like I said, I think you'll recognize it. So let's watch. I don't know about you, but hearing that song brings back so many memories. I cannot tell you how many times I'd be driving down the street, blasting that song on the radio. It just makes me feel happy. It's not even really a positive song, but it makes me feel really happy listening to it. It also makes me happy watching her sing it because I can feel her energy. And her friends, they were out there in the audience and they were just cheering her on. It wasn't even about winning for Egypt. It was about going out there and doing what she loved to do. When they announced the winner, I'm sure you could guess who it was. No shock to anyone but Egypt herself, because all of her friends already felt they knew that she was going to win. And she did.
The winner of W4 Country Idol 2014, Egypt!
She was gaining a lot more recognition, which built her confidence. And at this point, she decided she really wanted to put forth more effort in becoming a recording artist. So the next step was to audition for The Voice. So she started to record some music with a producer named Mr. Peace. And he thought that she was amazing. He saw a lot of potential in her. He does have a YouTube channel, and there are a couple videos that feature Egypt. I'm probably going to showcase one of them in this video. But she just knew how to command an audience to make them feel something time and time again. Anytime I would read anything about the way it was to be there when she sang, people would explain it would make them feel something. So speaking of Mr. Peace, here is one of those videos right now. This was a cover that Egypt did of a song called Rise Up by Andra Day. Again, I'm just going to play a short clip and leave the link to the whole video below so you can go check that out if you want to after the video's done.
And I'll rise up, I'll rise like the day, I'll rise up, I'll rise unafraid, I'll rise up, and I do it 1,000 times again.
You can tell just how passionate Egypt was about singing. So she didn't just command an audience on the stage. She also did that at her bartending job, and she had a lot of friends who were also in the industry. Her goal at that point in life while bartending wasn't just to be a bartender. She wanted to work her way up and land a job at a beer and wine distribution center. Meanwhile, she was working and living in a town called Belleville. It's just outside Detroit in eastern Michigan. I wanted to tell you a little about Belleville. According to BellevilleOnTheLake.com, they describe their community as nestled on the peninsula shores of beautiful Belleville Lake, a picturesque setting with tree-lined neighborhoods, a traditional downtown on the lake, enhanced by beautiful parks. It's a small town. The population was just under 4,000 people in 2010. Now, there is something that's going to be important here, which I had to learn about. Belleville is part of a township. I didn't know what that was. The township is referred to as the Van Buren Township. And the way that I can explain this, the best way that I can, is that it's almost like its own government. So even though Belleville is in Michigan, it falls under the control of the Van Buren Township. More on that later, but I wanted to add, I was going through Egypt's Facebook, and I learned so much about her. I went all the way back to 2009. She was someone who liked watching Weeds and Nip Tuck. She despised waking up early sometimes, and she thought her online classes in college sucked. It's like when we used to put up Facebook statuses when it would just say like your name and then you had to fill in the blank, like Kimber is feeling blank. So she does also talk about loving yoga, going for a run, loving her little dog Ruby, who's a little pug chihuahua mix. And she even talks about losing a friend and going to their funeral. She loves to read tarot cards. And on this post, June 7, 2010, which is actually my birthday, she said, I just found my debit card that I've been missing for over a week. I just canceled it 2 days ago, and now I have to wait 4 days to get a new one. It sounds like me. And it maybe even sounds like you. I really think all of us can relate to someone like Egypt. In 2010, Egypt was working at an assisted living facility, sometimes even working the midnight shift. This just goes to show you the kind of person she was. She was compassionate and caring. She devoted her time to others, and she carried that with her throughout her entire life. She was also a big fish in a very small pond. She was very popular in her town. She was well known and sought after. Definitely popular with the men. She wasn't shy about dating and had her fair share of relationships and maybe even some more casual encounters as well. Typical young woman living her best life. Everyone around town knew Egypt. Like I said, she lived in Belleville, Michigan. That's where she was born and raised, and it also became her final resting place. Now that you know a lot about Egypt and what kind of person she was, I want to tell you what life was like for Egypt in 2017 when she was living at 45576 Hull Road in the Van Buren Township in Michigan. She really loved where she lived when she first moved in. It's a little house. I'm going to show it to you right here. Now, it looks like it's just a house because it has this one door, but it's actually a duplex. When you go through that front door, there are 2 other doors on either side of a hall. One's on the left and the other is on the right. Each one of those doors go to their own unit. Egypt's unit was on the left, and the unit on the right was occupied by a couple named Steve and Megan and their child. Megan's father owned the duplex. And even though Egypt really did like living here at first, there came a time when she didn't. There were definitely a couple of reasons, or maybe more, that she was planning to move out in July of 2017. One of the reasons that she told her mother was that there was a lot of traffic coming in and out of Megan and Steve's units. And when I say traffic, I'm just going to be blunt. They sold drugs. Legally, though, according to what I read. Marijuana. They were running a medical marijuana business from the duplex. That was just part of their lifestyle and the business they ran, as well as breeding dogs, bulldogs. So they had a bunch of little bulldog puppies for sale all the time and marijuana. Living there just kind of ran its course, and Egypt was ready for something different, not to mention the fact that she had recently gotten back with an ex-boyfriend of hers named Curtis Meadows. So there's something you should know about Egypt and Curtis. Well, they had dated about a decade before this, when Egypt was about 20 years old and Curtis was 28. They met back in 2008, and they had an on-again, off-again relationship, back and forth and back and forth. When they met, she was working at a local bar, and he came in one night. It was around the corner from where he lived, and he saw her, and as cliche as it sounds, it was like love at first sight. All of her friends knew right away she also had a major crush on Curtis. She was just absolutely smitten by him. So they dated for about 2.5 years, but then there was a problem. It was their schedules. Curtis had a young daughter at the time, and he had the 9-to-5 type schedule where he had time to come home and cook dinner and eat dinner at the table, whereas Egypt, being younger and a bartender, had a schedule that wasn't concrete. It fluctuated. Sometimes, she might get home early, but then many times she would get home after midnight. That's just bar life. You could be strolling in at 2, even 3 o'clock in the morning or later. It just didn't fit Curtis's lifestyle. And as hard as it was, they ended up breaking up. It was not a good breakup because Curtis really broke Egypt's heart. But it was also easy to say this relationship wasn't that great. Even as much as Egypt really loved Curtis, she would tell her friends all the time that they would get into screaming matches, and she would show up at her friend's door at like 2 o'clock in the morning just crying her eyes out. I mean, I know I've been there. I think we've all been through something like this while growing up. Maybe you're going through it now. So it was probably best that they did part ways at the time. But this wasn't the last time they would get together, and it wouldn't be the last time that they broke up. They dated a few times between 2008 and 2017, but this time it was for real. Egypt was 27, and Curtis was about 35 years old. They were ready. Egypt could not be happier because everything was coming together for her. The year before, on February 29th, 2016, she finally landed her dream job. She became an account manager for Rave Associates, which is a beer and wine distribution company in Michigan. Craft beer is a big business in Michigan, and Egypt had a genuine love for craft beer. Now that she was in this new position at her job, she could visit all of her favorite local bars and restaurants and use her knowledge and her love to showcase all of the new and exciting products that Rave Associates had to offer for these establishments. She was also working on her music career. She just got a new car. She finally landed the guy that she was madly in love with, and they were planning on moving in together in early July. Why does it always seem like bad things happen when people think that they finally got everything together in their life? Isn't that ironic? Just when she thought it couldn't get better, it got worse. Way worse. Unbelievably worse. Because the last time the love of her life would ever talk to her was the night of June 22nd, 2017. Just a few weeks before Curtis and Egypt were going to move in together. He sent his last text at 10 o'clock p.m. Curtis said goodnight and that he loved her, and Egypt responded with nighty-night. Just a typical Thursday night. Egypt had spent the evening doing yoga with a few of her friends, and she decided to head home around 9 o'clock. She texted with Curtis and told him goodnight, and then she chatted with her friend Lindsay. Guess what they talked about? The big move with Curtis that would actually never happen. Like many couples, Curtis and Egypt kept in touch a lot through text. So the next morning, he did his usual check-in with a good morning text, just saying something like, "Good morning, my love." She didn't respond, which wasn't like her because it usually only took about 10 to 15 minutes for her to get back to him. But of course, no one's going to be freaking out if someone doesn't return their text maybe the first couple times. They could be busy, they could be getting ready for work, they could be at work, and that's what Curtis figured as well. Then throughout the day, Curtis was checking in again and again, and she still wasn't responding. So at that point, he had to think of another reason why. And in his mind, he thought, maybe she left her phone at home. Curtis was not big on social media. He actually didn't have social media. So he couldn't exactly go check on her because he didn't have Instagram or Facebook. He had to do what many of us did before modern technology, and that is wait. So he planned on going by her apartment later. That still didn't stop him from continuing to text her and say, "Are you okay? Where are you? What's going on?" That type of thing. Now, at some point throughout the day, he did reach out to one of his friends and he said, "Hey, can you check social media?" And he wasn't sure whether it was Snapchat or an Instagram post, but his friend said that she hadn't posted since the night before. So I went through her Instagram. I'm pretty sure this is the post right here. It looks like it could have been from when she was taking the yoga class that evening. You can see this post is from June 22nd, 2017. Here's what the caption says. It's a quote. It says, "And so with the sunshine and the great bursts of leaves growing on the trees, just as things grow in fast movies, I had that familiar conviction that life was beginning over again with the summer. F. Scott Fitzgerald." This is a very eerie caption to leave as your very last post on Instagram, considering what you're about to hear happened to Egypt. That night was indeed summer, and depending upon what you believe in, maybe Egypt's life was beginning over, but as far as what we consider life here on Earth, that ended for Egypt that night. It's just that no one knew it yet. Once Curtis got off work, he was having a late in the week Father's Day dinner with his daughter. When they wrapped up, he decided to drive over to Egypt's. He tried calling her again, and there still was no answer. When he finally turned down her street, and I'm going to show it to you right here, and by the way, this was not a very populated area. He just had a bad feeling. He felt like there was something wrong. It just didn't feel right. When he saw her car, he thought that was very odd. That she wouldn't be answering, but she was inside. So then he thought, maybe she's just been mad at me all day long. But something is wrong. Curtis parked his truck. He got out of it, and he walked to the main front door. When he got there, he realized it was open. It was open a pretty good amount, about 5 inches open. He steps through, and he got to her front door. He opened it. The first thing he saw was Ruby, Egypt's beloved dog. But Ruby wasn't acting the way she usually did when Curtis or someone else came over. She's super cute. She's always bouncing up and down, trying to get your attention, lick you, get into your lap. But this time, she was definitely trying to get Curtis's attention, but not in an excited and happy way. Not like she usually did. This was more of a tail between the legs, rushing around his feet, almost trying to guide him to a certain part of the apartment. Curtis is yelling Egypt's name. No answer. And Ruby just continues barking and barking, so he followed Ruby deeper into the apartment. He gets to the kitchen, and he could kind of see through it to the living room. Curtis was not expecting to see what he saw. It's something that will haunt him for the remainder of his life. He saw Egypt's feet. She was on the ground, and as he went further into the apartment and toward her, he could tell she was already dead. She was lying in the fetal position. Her hands were tied behind her back. She was laying on the left side of her face, and blood was all over her head. Curtis did not know what to do. He was in complete shock. He ran out of that apartment and back into his truck and immediately called 911. I listened to the entire 8-minute 911 call. I don't think it's necessary for me to play that entire call, but I will play you a portion of that call right now. And out of all the calls, and I say this so many times, but every time I do a new case, there's new things that happen and new things that I experience, and I'm going to tell you. For me personally, this is one of the most emotional ones I've ever listened to, just because of the pure length and rawness. It really did get to me. The call was made around 7:15 p.m. Here goes.
911.
I just showed up at my girlfriend's house. We're at 45576. I think it's just Bemis. And I walked inside. She's there, tied up. She's dead. There's blood around her head. There's flies. She's dead.
You said 45576 Bemis?
6. Yes, by the Clark Citgo gas station.
And you're sure she's dead?
Yes. She's tied up. There's lights. Oh my God.
Okay, don't. Okay, hold on.
No, the door was left crack open.
Okay.
She lives in a duplex. I'm knocking on the neighbor's door. I don't know. They're not there. I don't know. She lives in a duplex. There's neighbors, Steve and Meg. I don't know. I knocked on their door. No one's answering.
Okay. All right, what's your name?
My name's Curtis. Yeah.
And what's her name?
Egypt Covington. Jacqueline Egypt Covington.
Okay, hold on. Don't hang up.
No, okay. Oh my God. Oh my fucking God. Oh my God.
Okay, you there?
I'm here.
When was the last time you saw her?
Oh, Jesus. Yeah, last time I talked to her was 10 o'clock yesterday. I threw a text the day before, Thursday.
10 o'clock last night?
Yeah, that's the last time I heard from her.
Okay. Does she live there alone?
It's a duplex. There's so they're separate. There's a main door and two separate doors. They're supposedly Megan and Steve. They're a couple with a kid live in the other one. When I came here, the door was cracked open. It was open 4 or 5 inches.
Okay.
So I walked in. Her dog barked, and I saw the feet in the living room, and then I looked up, and I seen her with dog tied and blood all around her head.
Okay. All right, the officers are going to be there in just a minute. Just don't touch anything.
No, I just touched the door to go in.
All right, go ahead. Can you just go out front and look for them?
I'm out front. Yeah,
You're already out front?
I don't want to. Yes, I'm in a black truck right out front. Oh my God. Oh my God. Yeah, oh my God.
Okay, they should be there in just a minute. Look for them. Let me know if you see the officer. I want to make sure they find you there.
It's Hull Road. Sorry, Hull Road. Hull Road. Sorry, 45576 Hull Road.
All right, hold on a minute.
Sorry, sorry.
That's okay. That's okay.
Oh my God. Oh my fucking God. Oh my fucking God. Oh my fucking God. Oh my fucking God.
And you said you talked to her last 10 p.m. last night?
I texted her.
Texted her? Nothing unusual, though?
No. I've been trying to call. I called her work phone or cell phone 30 times a day. I texted my friend. I don't have social media, so I texted my friend asking if she's been like on social media today because I was worried. I was thinking maybe she's mad at me. I don't know. And he said her last post, I don't know if it was on Snapchat or Facebook, was like 11 o'clock or something last night. I don't know what it was. That was it.
Okay, the officers making their way up right to Hull Road right now. They should be turning on Hull. They'll be there in just a couple of minutes. Just hang in there.
I don't know about you, but that was very hard for me to listen to. I can't imagine. This is the love of your life. You're supposed to be moving in together. This is not what you imagine happening to your girlfriend. The girlfriend that's not answering your text messages. Someone you just spoke to the night before, not even 24 hours had passed. And I could just hear the shock in his voice when he keeps saying, oh my God, oh my God, oh my fucking God. Because he is going back and forth between trying to keep it together, to tell police what's going on, and then switching back to this horrifying realization that his girlfriend is dead. Back and forth between that reality and trying to really keep it together so they can find out who did this. And I feel for anyone who has to witness anything like this, especially when it concerns someone that you love. Now, I mentioned that the Van Buren Township governed this area of Michigan. So I'm going to refer to them as the VBTPD, or Van Buren Township Police Department. They had officers rush to Egypt's house. Curtis didn't have to wait long. They were there in just a few minutes after they got the right address, that is. Because in the complete state of shock he was in, Curtis gave them the wrong street. He said Bemis, that's kind of like a street over. This was Hull Street. Once all that was cleared up, it did not take long for officers to get there. And when they arrived on the scene, the first thing that they did notice, which they were also told by Curtis, was that the door was open. But it wasn't considered broken into. Technically, there was no forced entry into the duplex. They were taking what Curtis said into consideration as evidence that the door had been left open by the perpetrator or someone else. But the fact was nothing was broken. Nothing seemed to even be stolen from what it looked like. So they didn't consider this a robbery. It was something else. What it was to Curtis was the end of his future with the woman he loved. Everything they planned was never going to happen. Egypt had one gunshot wound to her head, right near her ear. Officers also noticed there was a couch cushion lying next to her, which had been put over her head before she was shot. There was a hole in it, presumably to muffle the sound of the gunshot. And that's when Curtis mentioned the neighbors, Stephen and Megan, that they lived in an adjoining unit in the duplex, but they were not home. The only witness to this crime seemed to have been little Ruby, the poor little dog, just helpless and waiting for someone to come find her mommy. One of the most unusual things about this crime scene was the way that Egypt was bound. I told you that her hands were behind her back, but it was what they were tied with that left everyone questioning who would do something like this. She was tied up with Christmas lights on a summer night in the middle of June. The next thing the police have to do is notify Egypt's family, her big family. Word traveled from one family member to the next until Egypt's father, Chuck Covington, got the news from Egypt's sister, Beth. It was unbelievable, devastating. To get a message like that about your daughter. Beth was hysterically crying, and Chuck could hardly understand what she was saying, but he ended up being able to make out that she was saying Egypt had been killed. Now Chuck had to relay this message to the rest of his family. He had to make those phone calls one after the other to every single person he knew who loved Egypt. One of those people was Egypt's brother, Dwayne Turner. I mentioned Dwayne earlier. He was Egypt's older brother who taught her all about bartending. He was a decade older than she was, and they shared the same mother, Tina. About 45 minutes away across town, Dwayne is having a reunion with his three closest friends, Matt, Leah, and Aaron, and they're at a place called Social Kitchen. It's a restaurant and bar in Birmingham, Michigan. They had not seen each other in years, and everything was so perfect that night. The weather was great. The crowd was really happening. They were enjoying the food and the drinks and catching up. But it was just before midnight when Dwayne saw Egypt's father was calling him. When he looked down and saw who it was, he was a bit confused. He wasn't used to getting calls from Chuck, but of course, he answered right away. At first, he couldn't even understand the words that were coming out of Chuck's mouth. He was just sobbing. Dwayne was trying to understand what he was saying over the music, the sound of the crowd, all the noise in the background. He was finally able to make out something like, "We lost Egypt. She was killed. She's gone." That's shocking. You are enjoying this night with your friends? Nothing like this is in your head. You never imagined you would get a call like that. Dwayne fell to his knees right there in front of everyone, shamelessly crying on the floor, but who wouldn't? This is his little sister. And at least he was surrounded by people who loved him and cared about him, that were there to console him. They got him up and they led him out the back door. They stayed with him for the rest of the night, making sure he was okay and comforting him in the best way that they knew how. Egypt was Dwayne's mini-me. He is the person she would come to for advice, especially on bartending. And he wrote a poem about her. After reading it, the qualities about Egypt that I wanted to share were these. She was the black sheep of her family. She had a smile that would brighten the room. She loved to cook. She was a very generous person. She would give you the shirt right off her back. She was definitely the life of the party, and music was just part of her, and it was her passion. Everybody loved Egypt, so who would have done this? That is what everyone was thinking when they heard the news. They were asking, why? She had the kindest heart. She was just a good person, and justice had to be done. Then there was Tina. She also received a call from Egypt's father, her ex-husband, Chuck. I don't think she would have been expecting to hear from him because they were not exactly on the best terms, even after all of these years. And as much as Egypt loved both her mother and her father so very much, they just did not see eye to eye. And I can tell you from what I know, through all the research I've done, they are two very different people. And I know opposites do attract, but not always and not forever. These two definitely butted heads, but in that moment, there was solidarity. In that moment, they came together because in that moment, Tina found out that her baby girl had been murdered. When she heard those words, all she could remember was screaming and crying and saying, "Not my baby." Tina couldn't imagine how this could happen. She just couldn't bear to think about the fact that she couldn't be there for her baby. As we get older, we are still our parents' babies. We're the adult children, but no matter how old my mom gets, she's still going to consider me her baby, and I'm going to consider my daughter my baby. And Tina just felt like she couldn't protect Egypt. She just wanted to know why. Why her? It didn't take long for the news of Egypt's murder to spread across the peaceful lake town. They did not have homicides in this area very often. 1, maybe 2, if that, in a year. So residents were definitely not used to seeing a headline that said, "Woman found murdered in her home." And even though all these local news stations and newspapers and everything were picking up this story, not much was actually being said. In good part because the authorities don't want to leak too much to the media, especially because they had no leads. There were also some facts that Curtis did not want the public to know about, especially Egypt's family. And before you think it's something suspicious, this is more of a courtesy. It was the Christmas lights. He didn't want the family to find out that Egypt's hands were bound in a string of Christmas lights. He didn't want them to have that association. Every time they were to see a beautiful Christmas tree and they would look at those lights, then they would imagine Egypt's murder. So he tried to keep that close to his vest. But of course, that was a detail that was going to come out. Because sadly, it's one of those details that makes a story more interesting, more flagrant, more clickable. I hate saying that, but it is true. It was one of those peculiar things in this case that many people have differing opinions on. And don't worry, I will definitely go into some of that. But right now, police are doing their best to canvass this area and to look around the entire apartment for clues. The hardest part for local residents to understand is how could this happen inside of Egypt's own home? To them, it meant that this could happen to anyone. She was at the right place at the wrong time. Police want to know if the neighbors Steve and Megan had heard anything the night before. So they try to get in contact with them, but it turns out they hadn't been home because they were at a music festival, a rave. It's one that they apparently attend every year called the Electric Forest Music Festival, and it was on the west side of Michigan. Because this is a small town, I guess a lot of people knew Steve and Megan as well. They seemed to be the town suppliers of marijuana because everyone seemed to know that they were going to be gone that weekend, that they always went to this festival. I was thinking maybe it's because they were working the festival, providing marijuana for the attendees. I'd never heard of it before, but it's held in a place called Rothbury, Michigan. It's an annual festival that goes on for 4 days, one weekend with multi-genre type music that focuses on electronic music. There you have it. When I mapped it from Belleville, it was a 3-hour drive and over 200 miles away. Needless to say, the cops didn't think that Steve and Megan had anything to do with this crime, nor would they have heard anything because they were not in town. Egypt's family was sad to hear that no one was there. Of course, they wouldn't have wanted anyone else to be hurt, but maybe they would have heard something. Maybe they would have seen something, or maybe they could have done something, but that just wasn't the case. The fact that none of the doors had actually been pried open and there were no signs of robbery, police started to believe that Egypt probably knew her killer. She most likely let them inside. And I know you're going to know exactly who they want to speak to first. The man that found her, Curtis Meadows, her boyfriend. He basically let police know right away he was not guilty of anything except for loving Egypt. He has nothing to do with this crime, nothing. And he said from the beginning, look at anything you want. You want to question me? Do it. I'll tell you anything you want to know. I'm an open book. And he was completely cooperative from the minute he made that 911 call. He told them every detail he possibly could know. He even sat down and did a lie detector test right away, and they grilled him for hours. There were a lot of questions. Curtis was honest. He even said, "I wasn't the greatest boyfriend back in the day, but now their relationship was stronger than it had ever been." So the Van Buren Township Police Department started to rule Curtis out. However, he gave them a piece of information about another boyfriend, an ex-boyfriend, not a current boyfriend, of course, but a recent ex-boyfriend, someone that Egypt had dated between the times that she and Curtis were not together. And according to Beth Covington, Egypt's sister, there was only one guy that Egypt dated when she wasn't with Curtis, and his name was Kenny Mahalik. Egypt had started dating him during one of her and Curtis's breakups. The thing is, Egypt's mother Tina knew Kenny's family really well. That's actually how Egypt ended up meeting Kenny. Kenny was 10 years older than Egypt, and he was really, really good looking. That's what people said. Really good looking, mechanic, and he was a ladies' man. A lot of women were interested in him because of his looks. Maybe not so much his personality. I mean, he was charming and funny, and he definitely caught Egypt's eye when they were at a family get-together, but there were some red flags too. We'll get to that in a moment. She pointed him out and she told her mom that she was going to date him someday. And she looks over there and says, "Well, you're never going to get him to marry you, so don't even get it in your head." And Egypt's response was sort of like, "Well, I'll fix that." So at one point, when her and Curtis weren't together, she decided to go for it. Egypt and Kenny started to date. To me, from all of the Instagram posts that I saw, I'll put some up on the screen, they had a pretty whirlwind type of relationship. She was in love, as far as I could see. She just couldn't stop posting pictures of him, talking about how funny he was. She would always be hashtagging like, "my man," and how cute he was. And it looked like they had a lot of fun together. The Van Buren Township Police Department was interviewing a lot of friends and family, and they were starting to hear Kenny's name come up multiple times, sometimes just because of the timeline. People just wanting to know as much information as possible. But many people who knew Egypt would say, you might want to look into Kenny. It might have looked like they had something solid on the outside, but that's not the whole story. They explained that when they were dating, it's not who she really wanted to be with. It was kind of like he was like Mr. Right Now. And what if that was true? Why did they date for so long? They were together for 3 years. And many of her friends, like her friend Nori, that was very close to her, explained, well, she wanted to break up with him, but she also wanted someone to be around. She craved that companionship. However, she also talked about wanting to cut him off time and time again. But remember, she was close to Kenny's family. So she didn't want to do it in a way that would cause a lot of drama or tension. They were still friends. So she would even go to family gatherings, and they still called and texted back and forth until she got with Curtis. A lot of her friends did not have very nice things to say about Kenny. A lot of them said that the relationship was volatile, that Kenny would take her phone, go through all of her text messages, get all of her friends' numbers, and even go sleep with them to get revenge or to belittle her or just make her feel like crap. Those aren't actually true friends, girls, just so you know. These kind of things made Egypt feel worthless. So Beth, Egypt's sister, said that when they were on this cruise vacation to the Caribbean that they took not too long ago, she confided in Beth about how bad her relationship with Kenny really was. Egypt told her that Kenny would punch holes in the wall and that they would have these screaming matches, and they'd been at a wedding, and according to her, something bad happened. They got into a disagreement, and he ends up throwing her up against a wall. Well, this isn't looking good for Kenny, but they needed to confirm all of this. So they go back to Curtis, and they ask him about Kenny, and he mentions that he knows all about that physical altercation at the hotel. Egypt told him that when the wedding had concluded, there were people getting together at a hotel nearby. The way that Egypt explained it wasn't exactly that they were getting physical, like they were physically fighting. It was more like he grabbed her and pushed her up against a wall to kind of hold her back. Curtis went on to explain that the police were actually called, but no charges were filed because neither one of them wanted to file charges against each other. The thing is, Egypt's mother, Tina, had a different story. She said that wasn't just about Kenny. Kenny wasn't the only one that was loud and had a big personality. Egypt would meet you in kind, so it was both of them. They both acted badly towards one another, and she knew how to push Kenny's buttons. Tina said that Egypt just knew which buttons to push, and she would push them. Tina called it passion. She also said it wasn't a big deal. Kenny wasn't even a confrontational type guy. He didn't even yell, according to Tina. Not only that, Tina said that the incident at the hotel, well, when the police came, they made a report. And in that report, it stated that both Egypt and Kenny were completely intoxicated, and neither one of them were cooperative. So it wasn't one-sided. It takes two to tango. But was this the truth? Or was Egypt hiding something from her mother because her mother was close to Kenny's family? Well, this is just the beginning of the Great Divide. That's what I'm going to call it. The divide between Tina and Chuck. I already told you that they were not on very good terms. They were already divorced. He was remarried, but now they're divided on something else right away. Chuck and his wife Kristen, as well as friends like Nori and Egypt's sister Beth, and the list goes on, they believe Kenny should be looked at as the prime suspect. More and more stories were starting to unfold about how they thought he was controlling and manipulative, that the wedding incident, that wasn't just something small, that the staff of the hotel were the ones that called the police because these two were arguing so loudly. So despite what Tina may say about Kenny, he was aggressive and explosive, according to friends, and that he had a very short temper. Egypt's friend Nori wasn't going to stop. She gave detectives all kinds of information, text messages from Egypt about how her and Kenny's relationship was going, how controlling he was and possessive. And worst of all, he wasn't happy about the breakup. He was jealous. He found out that Egypt was back with Curtis, and it did not go over well. And with more and more information coming out about Kenny, it gives more and more reasons to convince Chuck that Kenny's responsible for killing his daughter. His mind was made up. It made sense. Kenny wanted Egypt, and he couldn't have her. She left him for someone she thought was better, Curtis. And that drove Kenny crazy. It's like, if he couldn't have her, then nobody else could. But anytime things like this were said, Tina would follow it up and say, no, he's just a gentle giant. He's not like that. And she would continue to profess Kenny's innocence and be on his side. And that was a problem. It's almost like you had to choose a side. There was no middle ground. As a matter of fact, when it came to Egypt's memorial, Kenny wouldn't even come inside. He was out in the parking lot with his nephews, but his mom was inside sitting next to Tina. Tina looked over and she asked Kenny's mom where he was. And she said, well, he's afraid to come in here. Tina stepped outside, went up to him and said, get your butt in here and sit down. And then she sat right next to Kenny. Can you believe that? I mean, you could hear a pin drop. It was so silent. It was like crickets. What in the world is going on? Was Tina sitting next to her daughter's killer? That's what people were thinking. And the plot will thicken. You're going to hear a lot more about this. But to make things even more uncomfortable, Chuck gets up there and makes a speech. And let's just say after hearing it, there would be no question who he thought the killer was. Kenny. And this solidified it even more. You were either on Chuck's side or you were on Tina's side. But the real question was, who's on Egypt's side? The Van Buren police were supposed to be, but they didn't seem to be making much progress with the case. They were still interviewing all of Egypt's friends and family members, which turned out to be quite a task for such a small task force. Though the community is small, look how many people came out to that one singing competition a couple years before Egypt's murder. Hundreds. Not to mention the hundreds, maybe thousands of patrons that would come through the various bars that she worked at over the years. Almost a decade worth of people who knew Egypt, or at least knew of her, and they all wanted to provide information. It's as though the interviews never ended. There was always a new person trying to provide a tip, and you would think that these tips would be welcomed. After all, aren't the police trying to solve Egypt's murder? You'd think so. But it seemed like no matter how many people they talked to, the police were still laser focused on Kenny. However, some new information had finally been brought to the table, and it wasn't about Kenny. There were a lot of men that wanted Egypt's attention, and one of those men was apparently her former boss. Now, the stories varied. Some people said Egypt was in a relationship with him at some point. They didn't know if it was like just a physical relationship or something more, but he was married. So many people were kind of hush-hush about it. Others tried to give police as much information as they could from what they had seen or heard during the time that this so-called relationship was materializing. What was said was that he took an interest in helping with her music career. So right after she won the Country Idol contest, Egypt told her friend Leslie that her former boss at the time, offered to take her all the way to Nashville for the next big tryout. And Leslie didn't think this was a very good idea. But if you know Egypt by now, there's nothing that's going to stand in the way of Egypt's dream. So she went on the trip anyway. But when she came back, she confided in Leslie that it didn't go well. Apparently, he wanted more. He wanted, more from this little deal, taking her all the way there to make her dream come true. That kind of like, what's in it for me thing, and she wasn't having it. So they got into a big argument, and police wanted to understand what this guy wanted from Egypt. What type of person was he? How bad was this argument? Would there be any reason to harm Egypt? Or could someone else have a reason, like a wife? Dwayne was actually familiar with this former boss. He knew him, and he definitely saw red flags. He said the guy had a temper. It did not take much to set him off. He was known to flip out on people. The investigators call him in. Meanwhile, the town is buzzing about whether this guy could be Egypt's killer. Sure, enough rumors started to swirl around, lots of gossip, how he was infatuated or obsessed with Egypt. Maybe he wanted revenge just because, she didn't give him a chance while they were out in Nashville. Could that have set him off? There were a lot of questions, but it turns out the police crossed him off their list pretty fast. Reason? He fully cooperated with them. He said he was never interested in a romantic relationship with her. He was married. He loved his wife. His wife knew all about the trip he took with Egypt to Nashville. He was just trying to be a good friend and help out where he could. He liked Egypt, and he wanted her to succeed, that's all. Well, the police may have ruled him out, but not the court of public opinion. They hadn't. They wouldn't rule anyone out unless there was complete, concrete proof of who did it. Everyone was a suspect, and without more leads coming in at all, the Van Buren Township Police Department just kept going right back to Kenny. They still hadn't made an arrest, though. And he wasn't even officially a suspect, not even official person of interest. They just kept pressing Curtis and other people close to Egypt to tell them anything they could about Kenny, especially anything that seemed off. And that's when Curtis comes forward with even more damning information. He tells them that a month prior to her murder, it was early on a Sunday morning, while Egypt was spending the night at Curtis's house. He looks out of his window from the third floor, and he saw Kenny in the parking lot. Kenny's truck is parked behind Egypt's car, and Kenny was outside looking into her windows. What the hell? That's creepy. And the police thought so too. The police wanted to know what Curtis did next, and he said, I just watched Kenny get back into his truck and drive off. Curtis did explain that Egypt told him she confronted Kenny about it, and that he explained it away saying, "Oh, I was just on my way to work and I spotted your car and it was starting to rain and I saw that you had your sunroof open, so I don't know, he was going to close it. I don't know. It sounds suspicious. Something doesn't add up." And not only that, there was a theory that Curtis came up with. He said he thought that Kenny had put a tracking device on Egypt's car, and that morning Curtis thought Kenny was most likely coming by to retrieve it. Yes, because this wasn't the first time Kenny knew exactly where Egypt was. That's right. He had shown up at the same place she was at a number of times, and it started to make Egypt feel uncomfortable. She even told her stepmom, Chris, about it. She explained that she really wanted to tell Kenny that she needed to be left alone. She needed space, but it was hard for her to do that. She said Kenny was like a lost puppy dog, and Chris responded with, "Well, you can't save every last puppy." Everyone really wanted Egypt to move on, and they were truly hoping that when she got back with Curtis, this would make it clear to Kenny that she was done. But it just didn't seem like he was getting the hint. Until the Belleville Strawberry Festival. It's a pretty big deal in Belleville, something that the town has been known for since 1977. That's when it started. It was a way for local farmers to celebrate their strawberry crops, but it's evolved quite a bit since then. It's got it all. It's a carnival. It's got live music, animals, bingo, a parade, Clydesdale horses. There's strawberry treats, craft vendors, a karaoke tent, lots of great food. I'm a Southern girl. I like carnival food so much. I didn't see any corn, but look at this place. It happens every year on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday during Father's Day weekend. And it really does seem like the perfect place for a little Father's Day fun with the kids. And it's 2017. It was on June 16th, 17th, and 18th. I get excited because this was something that got Egypt excited. I never want you to think I'm coming off insensitive and just happy while I'm explaining what happened in these cases. But this was a small town, and it was something that Egypt really looked forward to. It's a lot of fun. But even though it may have been a small town, it's actually estimated that every year, the Belleville Strawberry Festival brought in over 200,000 people from southeastern Michigan and further. That was something important to note, considering Egypt was in attendance on Saturday, June 17th, just days before she was found dead. Kenny was there too, and so was Curtis. Curtis got there first, and he planned to meet up with Egypt. However, Egypt's plan was to meet with Kenny to let him know once and for all they were done, that she's serious about Curtis and they're moving in together. When Curtis arrived, he saw Kenny right away, so he made sure to stay away, according to him. He wasn't there to get involved, and once Egypt arrived, she went right over to Kenny, who was surrounded by a group of their friends. And this is from what Curtis could see from afar, that they were having a very intense conversation. He had no idea what kind of words were being exchanged, but from the body language alone, it said it all. Once Egypt was done, she started to walk toward Curtis. But Kenny didn't stay back. He was following her. So she turns around and she gets in his face. Then they exchanged some heated words. They were very upset. She ends up running off. And then 5 days later, she's murdered. They had already interviewed Kenny from the beginning of this investigation, just hours after Egypt's body was found. He was out at a bar, and then they found him, they brought him back to the station, and they kept him there for hours, grilling him with question after question. The most important one was, where were you on the night of June 22nd? He said that he spent most of his evening out at bars with his friends, and then he went home and he went to bed. It's not a great alibi. You got your drunk friends and then you were home alone. That's not the only reason Kenny was their number one person of interest. He failed the polygraph test. Yeah, and it was bad. The only thing they said he got right was his name and the date. After that, everyone thought Kenny was guilty. But polygraphs? Really? They're not admissible in court. So unless they found real concrete evidence, nothing more could be done. But it was even harder to do anything to Kenny because he retained an attorney. He seemed to be sick of having all the fingers pointed in his direction, and he claimed he was innocent. And he wanted them to go look at someone else because her killer was still on the loose and it wasn't him. I hope you are still here watching this because it's about to get crazy. I've never even done a case like this. Just wait. I'm telling you, just wait. Caught in the middle of all this was Dwayne. He was Tina's son too. It's hard not to take your mother's side. He loves his sister and he just wants the truth to come out. He didn't even want to pick sides, but he knew that his mother had always been taught that you do not go around accusing someone of something that could ruin their life unless you have proof. So what actual proof did Van Buren Township Police Department have? Sooner or later, Tina was being pegged as somewhat of a traitor or betraying her own daughter, especially when Chuck's side finds out Tina allowed Kenny to babysit little Ruby, the dog. Here's something else I want to just say a caveat. Tina was desperate at one point. She even went to an expert to try to see if the dog could somehow remember something, recognize the killer somehow. I know it sounds silly, but guys, I don't know if you've ever been in this situation. I know I have not. You're at your wit's end. You're going to go through any possible way you could get more information. It turns out that this expert said yes, a dog can react differently to seeing somebody that, had done something like this, but the only thing they would probably do is just back away from them. So there's no real science behind it, and there's no real data to, use for these purposes. But I just wanted to let you know that's how desperate her family really was. As far as the whole situation with Ruby and Kenny, Tina thought it was absurd. Ruby knew Kenny, Ruby loved Kenny, and Kenny loved Ruby. Tina insisted that Egypt would always let Kenny babysit Ruby anytime he wanted, and Tina just couldn't say no. Kenny had lost Egypt. She didn't want him to lose Ruby too. I have to get your thoughts on this because I am an animal lover and I am a dog lover, and I know a lot of you are too. Thoughts? Just in the comments, please. I read them. No one was thinking about that. As far as Tina was concerned, regardless of the allegations, Tina saw things differently. Maybe she was biased because she was close to Kenny and his family. The real reason she didn't think differently after Kenny was officially named the person of interest, which was 9 months following the murder, was because she thought the Van Buren Township Police Department was just a small department that didn't have the resources to get it right. They had to pin the murder on someone. So why not the ex-boyfriend who had a public fight with her just days before her murder? Tina thought this was a job for a much bigger department, like the Michigan State Police. Egypt worked in an industry that exposed her to hundreds of people. Anyone could have been watching her. It doesn't have to be someone she knew. It could be anyone, and Tina thought they needed to expand their search. Tina knew Egypt did not feel safe where she was living. She was concerned that this was not anyone close to Egypt. Dwayne was leaning more toward his mother's side. 7 months following Egypt's death, his mind had shifted towards something else, or I should say, someone else. And I'm not talking about another suspect. I'm talking about a new love interest, because during all this sadness, Dwayne met a woman named Lindsay. They were both playing sand volleyball with friends, and they ended up meeting each other. There's a reason why I'm telling you this. I'm not going on a tangent about Dwayne and his love life. Hear me out. It was January 2018, and Dwayne may have been happy that someone like Lindsay came into his life, but he wasn't going to share the truth about his life with her. The truth about Egypt. It was too much too soon, so he stayed quiet. Besides, Lindsay lived 30 miles away in another town. She wasn't part of their close-knit community. She was a mom of 3 and a kindergarten teacher. She had enough to worry about, and her and Dwayne were not even officially a couple. They were just casually going out, having a good time together. However, after hanging out for, a few weeks, Lindsay had questions. One question in particular. She wanted to know who the gorgeous girl was that Dwayne had on his phone lock screen. Could have been jealousy, could have been pure curiosity, but she was intrigued. She just wondered, who could that be? And it wasn't until one night after they had a few drinks that Lindsay got up the nerve to ask, and she was not ready for the answer. Not at all. She wasn't expecting to hear that Dwayne had a younger sister that had been murdered and that they hadn't caught the killer. She wasn't even expecting him to say it was his sister. She thought, wow, that's interesting, maybe even kind of weird. But then when Dwayne told her why his sister's picture was there and what had happened and that his little sister had been murdered, she was in complete shock. I do not know how I would react, but Lindsay had a lot of questions. Maybe some of you wouldn't think this, but one of Lindsay's first thoughts was, oh my God, what if Dwayne had something to do with it? I mean, it is a logical question to have. You hear that someone's close to someone that was murdered and that it's unsolved. She was like, who knows? And she was not comfortable getting closer to Dwayne or letting him meet her kids if there was any suspicion that he was involved. She knew nothing about this case, where it stood, and she wanted to learn more. There were so many questions going through her mind. Who did this? Why did they do it? How did the police not know? And then she asked Dwayne, did you do it? Where were you on the night that this happened? When she asked Dwayne who he thought did it, he said that the most likely suspect was Kenny. But then she pressed him as to why he felt that way, and he couldn't explain why. He even admitted to Lindsay that he had never been interviewed. Wow. Almost a year later, and a person in Egypt's family has not been interviewed. Yet the Van Buren Township Police Department keep telling their community members they were diligently doing their jobs. When Lindsay found out everything that happened, she couldn't sleep. Maybe it was that motherly love and instinct. She'd been thinking about the fact that this was the seemingly unsolved case about someone's daughter, someone's sister, someone's loved one, and that kept her up all night. She just kept thinking, how can I help? And how could they get to the bottom of this? She was determined. There was just this light inside of her that was burning for answers. She was thinking about the fact that she has a brother. She has 2 little boys, and how the community and the police were already suspecting Egypt's boyfriend. So in her mind, she thought, what would happen if this was someone in my family, if this was a man in my family? What if they were being accused of murder, but there was no way for them to prove it? How would I feel? What would I want? And I really like how Lindsay looks at things. She looks at things from both sides. She could put herself in Kenny's family shoes too. There's always many sides to a story, but one thing's for sure. Lindsay wouldn't stand around without asking questions and doing something to solve this case. For the sake of everyone involved, her boyfriend, her boyfriend's family, Egypt's family, and anyone who knew and loved her. So this was the moment that Lindsay became Egypt's warrior. That's the mindset that she had. She wasn't going to stop until she found the answers. And at this point, she wasn't even in love with Dwayne. She really liked him, but she just had this overwhelming feeling that this was something she had to do. She's not an investigator. This is not her job to solve crimes. But after talking to Dwayne, it didn't seem like anyone was. So the first thing that she was thinking is that they should start with the most likely suspect, the one who police believe did it, Kenny. She heard that the Van Buren Township Police Department just needed a little more evidence. That's all. They just needed one more thing, and that's what was stopping them from making an arrest. Well then, how can they provide them with that one thing so that they could prove it? And more importantly, if it really wasn't Kenny that did this, how could they go about finding out who really did? Well, Lindsay and Dwayne were breathing new life into Egypt's case. Lindsay was going 100 miles per hour. She gathered all of the info that they already knew, and she started to conduct her own interviews. She was making phone calls and pretty much gathering their own evidence, just like detectives. And with modern technology, guys, everyone and anyone can investigate crimes. There have been a number of cases solved in just the past few years that have been because of social media and people coming together on places like Facebook to gather information. Lindsay was doing all of that. Facebook pages, hashtags, t-shirts, flyers, anything and everything that she could do to bring and keep awareness on Egypt's case. Then, around 9 months after her death in March of 2018, the Van Buren Township Police Department finally officially announced their person of interest. No surprise, Kenny. Around the same time, Kenny's lawyer put out a public statement, and I want to read it to you. Van Buren Township Police noted in their recent press release that my client was not currently in communication with the department, which is a bit misleading. He, Kenny, fully cooperated with police, interviewed with them on multiple occasions, provided a full timeline of his whereabouts during the days surrounding Miss Covington's death, and has remained in town the entire 10 months of this investigation. Further, since being retained to represent him in late June 2017, I've reached out and spoken with Van Buren Township Police on a dozen of occasions, asking for updates and seeing if they needed anything else from us. He goes on, to be certain, he continues to maintain his absolute innocence regarding anything to do with Miss Covington's death, as he's done from the very beginning. Kenny has been maintaining his innocence since day one. He retained his attorney, and that was the statement, but at this point, people are even donating billboards, big billboards, to be placed all around the town to keep Egypt's case in the hearts and the minds of the residents, hoping that someone with information would come forward. And that is what they need, a tip, a lead, something else to go on, or something to put Kenny behind bars. Someone had to speak. Well, investigators were even telling people who donated these billboards to place them on Kenny's street. Yes, they were hoping that this was going to put pressure on him to confess or for someone close to him to come forward. But nothing transpired. It probably just pissed him off. Someone else was pissed about this whole situation, and that was Chuck Covington. As a matter of fact, when Chuck saw the billboards, the thought that crossed his mind was that he was hoping the killer would pass by one of them, stick a firearm in their mouth, and you know what. Pretty drastic. But I gotta say, I am not him. I've never been in that position. I don't know what he was feeling, so I don't blame him for these emotions that were coming out. For everyone that loved Egypt, the billboards were a sad reminder that she was gone. Curtis would drive by one and make a little promise to Egypt every time. He would just say, "I've got you." And he promised that they would find out who did this to her. So remember how Tina does not think that this township police department is able to do the job? Well, she makes a suggestion that they hire a private detective, somebody with a lot of experience who could come in and just kind of look around for other things that they might be missing. Well, a friend named Debbie, she sets up a fundraiser and they end up hiring this man, Dave. Now, I'm not going to go into all of his credentials, but he's been working in law enforcement for over 20 years. Lots of experience from like homicide to covert operations to undercover work. The guy is legit. He's experienced and he is retained to work for Egypt. And I'm going to repeat, for Egypt. He is not working for Tina. He was retained by a fundraiser. People from the community came forward and hired him for Egypt. I'm repeating this because this becomes another huge divide in the family, since Tina is essentially, manning this situation. She's the navigator, I guess you could say. But on August 22nd, 2018, 14 months after the murder, the private investigator Dave and Tina set up a meeting with the Van Buren Township Police Department and their chief of police, Jason Wright. Wait until you hear the comments that were made by these law enforcement officials. These were the two of the highest officers in command. The chief doesn't hesitate to tell Tina that they've already taken this investigation as far as they can, and that no one besides your own family wants to solve this case as much as they do. And the only way they can solve the case is if someone comes forward. That sounds like quite a cop-out. That's just like saying, we hope it'll just get solved on its own. Then they went on to say, they had their suspicions, but they could not connect anyone. And that they can usually solve a murder in a week, but that this case was different from day one. So Tina wanted to know what they found in Egypt's phone. She asked them, did you ever get it unlocked? And I'm sitting here thinking, wait a minute, you're talking about Face ID, like what kind of lock, a passcode? And like nobody in her life knew it, because I truly believe someone should know it. My boyfriend's face and my daughter's can open up my phone, but no, apparently these police officers were locked out of her phone. What is this? The Stone Age? 14 months and there was no way inside her phone, not even with a gray box? That's what Tina asked. And they didn't even know what a gray box was. This is a device that came around after a lawsuit in regard to Apple locking the iPhones without allowing anyone, even law enforcement, inside. And it allows the contents of an iPhone to be dumped. It doesn't have to be unlocked. It's not even unlocked. It's just dumped. Chief Wright said that he had never heard of a gray box. Well, yeah, you get 2 homicides a year or so, you probably don't have access to that technology. So then Dave says, well, have you been doing any process of life analysis? Chief Wright didn't know what that was either. This is a process that's used to analyze a victim's life and the impact of all the people and the environment and things that they'd have on her ultimate demise. Yeah, they were not aware of anything like that, but they said, oh, but we're looking for patterns, but we're not sure which ones. All of this is very concerning, but now there's something even more concerning. They basically tell Tina that they're not going to have the same relationship with her as they do with Chuck, Egypt's father. Why not? These are both of the victim's family members. That is her mom and dad. Well, they say it's because Chuck and Tina aren't on good terms, and she hasn't been very thrilled with the way the detectives have been taking the case. So basically they're saying, we're not going to work with your private detective because he's working for you. That's why I kept reiterating, isn't everyone working for Egypt? How childish is this? It started to make me think, is this what happens behind the scenes of murder cases? This back-end bullshit that we don't see over niceties? Like, oh, well, he's nicer to us than you are, and you don't like us. You don't think we're doing the job, so we're not going to even talk to your private investigator. Very odd. And this case is very odd. If victims' parents don't care for the detectives, does this mean it changes the methods they use to solve the case or block others from helping? What's the issue? Well, the issue was that Tina didn't agree that Kenny was the killer. Everyone else pointed their fingers at him from day one. Egypt's father, the stepmom, the authorities, they were all on the same side pushing that narrative. Is it not okay to question things and say, wait, let's not focus all of our attention on this one person? They can't even arrest him. Still waiting over a year for one last piece of information. That's what they keep telling people. Why are they just sitting on their butts waiting? So there's Tina. She's thinking anyone that goes against their narrative isn't going to get good treatment, even the mother of a victim. I don't know, are cops always this way? Let me know if you know, because this is the very first case where I'm getting to see this type of information, and I have Lindsay to thank for all of this. I listened closely to everything she put together through her own research, and it was very valuable. And wait until you hear what happens next. After the meeting, the director of public safety, a guy named Greg Lorraine, says to Tina that there's a rumor going around that Egypt got around. Excuse me? Egypt got around? What the F? He can't be serious. This was a clear sign that they did not care about Egypt. Look at the way they painted her. You can use your imagination on what they were thinking in regard to her getting around. And I can't even begin to imagine how frustrating it would be to have no power over solving your own daughter's case, and they have all the evidence and they won't provide it to you or your detective. It's like they're holding her daughter captive even after death. It's like a sick purgatory. These are the people that have been entrusted to solve Tina's daughter's murder. Lindsay says, F it. I'm going to go ask Kenny some questions myself because this girl's a badass. And I've never done this before, but Lindsay if you're watching this, and I know a lot of family members watch my videos, if they see their loved one's name pop up, reach out to me. Honestly, I would love to have a conversation with you. I would love to collaborate on something with you, Lindsay, because none of the viewers know this yet, but Lindsay even started a podcast about true crime. I'm going to talk about that later, but let's get back to 2018. Lindsay and Dwayne, they decided to simply call Kenny up and ask him, did you do it? Did you kill Dwayne's sister? And Kenny answers, talks to both of them and says, no, I didn't kill your sister. Of course, Lindsay asks, well, do you have proof of that? Do you have proof that you didn't kill her? And surprisingly, Kenny says, yes, he does. He literally agrees to sit down with them to talk so that he could tell them his side of the story. Well, here's the thing. Even though Lindsay and Dwayne are fully capable of talking to Kenny and jotting down notes, it was actually pretty important that this interview was done correctly. Lindsay and Dwayne got their foot in the door with Kenny, but now it was time for someone professional to sit down and hear him out. That's what Dave did, and Kenny agreed. So on June 14th, 2018, Kenny sat down with Dave and agreed to answer questions about Egypt. Kenny explained that the relationship was always pretty complicated from the beginning. But he said from the time they broke up, they were sleeping together on and off for at least the next 8 months. However, they were not together and not in a relationship. The relationship was off by the time he heard that she was back with Curtis and moving in with him. That was a great segue into the Strawberry Festival and the fight that ensued. So Dave asked him about that too. He said he didn't show up with friends. He knew a lot of people in town and he knew he'd probably run into people that he could just hang out with. Well, one of those people he says he ended up running into was actually Curtis. And that's not exactly the story that we heard, but Kenny said he overheard Curtis talking about Egypt moving in with him. He didn't remember who Curtis was talking to, but he heard it. And then about 30 minutes later, Egypt comes up to them and wants to know kind of like, what are you doing here? Why are you with Curtis? Why are you guys in the same vicinity? She wants nothing to do with it. And Kenny tries to say, hey, I want to talk to you about Curtis. She wasn't having it. So she walks away with Curtis. Kenny went over there and said, look, we're going to talk about this. So hang on, because I personally see how this can look aggressive. He's coming towards the couple. He's obviously annoyed by what he heard. Don't know if Curtis or whoever said it wanted him to hear it because it was an earshot, but either way, it does seem like he wants to instigate something. I could be wrong. Nevertheless, he said that Egypt just laughed at him, and Dave said to Kenny, well, were you mad that she was moving in with Curtis? And he said, no, I wasn't mad. I was just surprised because she didn't tell me about that. So Dave asked if they still talked, and Kenny said, yes, we are like family. And he added that his sisters still went to movies with her. And he goes on to explain and admit that, yes, they exchanged some hot words, but it wasn't something that would ever lead to murder. And it didn't lead to murder. It was just like, why the F didn't you tell me about it? But she wasn't having it. And she was just like, F you, and left. Kenny even admits he did punch not one, but 2 holes in a wall, but he repaired them both. Dave pressed Kenny about the timeline. Thursday, he said he was at the lake with his friends during the day. Then he went out to the bars. He even said where he went. He went to Bayou, Egan's, Lakeview, one after the other. He stayed out till about 10 o'clock and then went home. Went home, ate some burritos, put on some Netflix or Hulu on his phone, and that's it. He also told Dave that he already told all of this to Van Buren Township Police Department and asked them to please verify it to clear him. Kenny explained that he used his phone the whole time. It would show up. It would show his GPS, his whereabouts, what he was watching, when he was watching the shows, and he told the police, go check it. Get this. He even gave them his phone and his passcode, and then he told them that he had OnStar on his truck, and he wanted the Van Buren Township Police to check that out too, so they could confirm his alibi and focus on someone else. But Kenny explained that they had their sights set on making him the murderer, and that was that. As a matter of fact, the first night they interviewed him, they straight up looked at him and said, you look guilty. And he said, well, whatever. Just tell me what you need to know because I am not guilty. But then he failed the polygraph. That's when they started to really put pressure on him. They were berating him. They were calling him a liar. And that's when they threatened to put him in jail for life. That is why he got an attorney. When Dave was done with the interview, he gave the tape over to Lindsay and Dwayne. This was exactly what Lindsay wanted. Answers. Now that they heard Kenny's version in his own voice, which was pretty calm, by the way, and he sounded that way through the whole thing, Lindsay and Dwayne begin to change their minds. Or at the least, they begin to lean toward someone else being responsible besides Kenny. They thought it was a pretty good alibi because it can be verified. All police had to do were pull things like bank records, phone records, video cameras at gas stations. There's gas stations lining roads to those bars. And if they had Kenny's phone, what did they find in it? Why wasn't more being done? What was the OnStar all about? Did that evidence ever get looked at? Lindsay and Dwayne were excited. They felt like they were getting somewhere. Now they needed to go even further. They felt like they wanted to share their findings with the rest of the family, Chuck's side, and some of Egypt's close friends because they thought it was important to come together for Egypt with everything they knew. Plus, Lindsay wanted to hear what Chuck and Kristen had to say because Lindsay kept hearing, if you only knew what Chuck and Chris knew about Kenny, then you'd see why he's guilty, no doubt. So show them. That was their train of thought. Good. You have proof? Put it on the table. But when Lindsay sent out invitations, it was crickets. No one wanted to talk. Some of them declined right away with no real reasons. And Lindsay started to think, maybe it's me. Maybe it's her. So you know what she said? Let me stay back. Let this be more of a family affair. So she told Dwayne, listen, let it be only your family. And people still declined. The only few that agreed were Chuck, Chris, and a close friend of Egypt's that was not named during my research. It's not important. What's important to note is that Lindsay knew this wasn't going to be an easy conversation. She had already been told how thick-headed and dead set Chuck was on Kenny being the murderer. But she felt like she owed it to Egypt to try. And by the way, word had probably already gotten to Chuck because he was kind of buddy-buddy with the Van Buren Township Police Department. And they were not happy that Dave was conducting interviews and stepping on their toes. Really, though? Because isn't it in everyone's best interest to solve this case and have the right person behind bars? It's not a competition or a pissing contest, and that's just, it's someone's life. And I was getting heated. All of this was getting me heated when I was reading it and listening to things. Chuck had been very vocal and public about Kenny. He had spoken to media outlets, he'd been on shows, just making accusations and stating that the only one that had access to her apartment to carry out this crime was Kenny. And technically, that's incorrect. If we're being 100% accurate, Curtis did too. And so did her neighbors, for that matter. But Curtis could do no wrong in their eyes. They loved Curtis, so it cuts both ways. They were okay with one of her boyfriends, but not the other, and both had access to her. All that mattered were facts, and that is what Lindsay and Dwayne wanted to offer to Chuck. So finally, a dinner date was set with Egypt's dad, Chuck, stepmom, Chris, and close friend. They agreed to host a dinner at the Covington household. Lindsay brought a nice bottle of wine over, and she was welcomed inside their home. Before this night, they all got along pretty well. They had dinners together. Lindsay brought her father out to a Detroit Tigers game with all of them to celebrate a beer that was created in Egypt's honor. We'll talk about that later because I think it's so super special. But all they wanted to do was sit down with everyone, eye to eye, and share info. It was like, convince me. Their intention wasn't to say they knew for sure that Kenny didn't kill her, but they didn't know for a fact that he did. Right away, Egypt's friend arrives and she's, according to Lindsay, high, and she continues to smoke throughout the night, which made Lindsay feel like they weren't going to be taken seriously. Then another sore subject comes up, and it was Chuck who brought it up, Tina. Yes, and I don't know how deep this hatred or this feud goes between Tina and her ex, but it was a rule at the dinner table, like Tina should not be discussed, so why are you bringing her up then? The friend had actually publicly talked crap about Tina on Facebook. Only reason I'm mentioning this is because remember that this is Dwayne's mother. It's Egypt and Dwayne's mother that they're talking about. It's disrespectful. You can dislike someone, but that is still someone's mother. And if you talked about my mother, my sisters, my daughter, anyone I love, it's going to set me off. And it was probably hard for Dwayne to hold his tongue. So before they could even get to the topic of Kenny, there was already tension surrounding Tina. Why? Because Chuck did not like that this guy Dave was sticking his nose into everyone's business. Why? What's the issue? Well, Chris pipes up and she says, I don't like Dave because he sends me inappropriate text messages. Well, that was news to Lindsay, and it was also quite concerning. Clearly, they don't want some man that they're working with to be inappropriate. So by the way, Lindsay asked to see the text or for information, and Chris was just like, I don't want to get into it right now. Well, to flash forward and come back, Lindsay does end up checking this out, and she goes through all of the text message exchanges between Chris and Dave, and there's nothing inappropriate. Yeah, so what's the story? Let's get back to what transpired this fall night in October of 2018. As Lindsay is still trying to understand the issue that they have with Dave, Chuck butts in and sternly tells Lindsay to basically shut up. He may have said it in a nicer way. He may have just hushed her, but nonetheless, she was pretty embarrassed. He said that she was talking too much and it was his turn to talk. So she just shut up right then and there. And Chuck gives his reasoning as to why they don't trust Dave. And wait until you hear this. Here's a name we haven't heard in a while, but I think it's a very important person in this case in many ways. Steve. Remember Steve? He's the neighbor, the guy that lives in the adjoining apartment on the other side of the duplex, the couple that sells weed and puppies. Well, Steve told Chuck, and by the way, why do they talk? What connection would they have? Why would Steve offer up information like this to Chuck? Or was he getting it through the good old boys at the Van Buren Township Police Department? We'll talk about why there's some ties that exist between Chuck and the township, but Steve told Chuck that Dave actually tried to break into his apartment. Lindsay's stunned. She's like, couldn't Steve be lying? And Lindsay went on to say, we tried to reach out to Steve to speak to him, but he declined. If Steve didn't have anything to hide, why was it such an issue that a detective wanted to speak to him? And that's when the friend chimes in and says, well, he'll never talk to you. And Lindsay was shocked. She's sitting there thinking, what the heck? Are all of a sudden you guys all of Steve's personal secretaries? Because Kristen's also adding fuel to the fire, saying that Dave called Child Protective Services on Steve and Megan to get their child removed. Lindsay knew damn well that that was not true. Actually, he didn't, nor did Dwayne, nor did Tina or Lindsay. On the contrary, the Township PD already had issues with Steve's place. They were inside themselves, and it's true, Dave had been asked about what Steve and Megan's place looked like. He did not break in. He had been over there. And it was after that visit that Steve took issue with him. The township police actually called Dave and said, what did you see inside? They also asked Dwayne and Lindsay what they saw, but they had never been in the unit. So it was actually the township doing their own research into Steve, not Dave. We'll find out more about that unit later on, but at this point, dinner is not going well. No one is even eating. Lindsay doesn't understand why this is even a big deal. If you're a parent and you have nothing to hide, let them come. She's a mom. If someone is harming a child or living in conditions that aren't healthy, then they should be held accountable. If not, let the checks begin for the well-being of the children. Nothing Lindsay says seems to be getting through to anyone except, of course, her other half, Dwayne, who knows Chuck very well. He spent many years growing up around this man, and he keeps quiet, which is probably wise. Things did not get better, and they tell Lindsay why they don't like Tina, because she hangs out with a person of interest. Lindsay probably shouldn't have said anything, but she chimed in, "Well, you do too with Curtis." This set Chuck off, and he already was. This was already going to happen. I feel like no matter what was said, it would happen. But he set his phone timer for 30 seconds, and he told Lindsay she could talk for that long. That's it. Well, Lindsay does not let men speak to her that way. Nope. She was there putting all this effort into helping his daughter's murder be solved. She did not feel respected, and she showed it. She caused a little bit of a scene, which ended in them pretty much saying something to the effect of, "You know what? You never even knew Egypt. You never even met her. And you're going to come in here and challenge her family. It wasn't okay." Well, she leaves. She gets into her car. She has a little cry. She definitely felt defeated. If it were me, I'm really sensitive. I would have been bawling my eyes out. I don't think I'm anywhere near as strong as Lindsay. And even though she was upset, she understood it. She was the new girl. She was dating Egypt's brother. Who was she to say anything? To tell them that Egypt's family was wrong. So she decides it's time for her to back off, to stop doing this. She realized it probably wasn't her place to do so, but Dwayne wasn't going to let that happen. He just kept saying, "Please don't. Please don't stop. Don't stop. Don't allow this to stop our fight for my sister." That's what he said. But she did not want to tear this family apart even more. She felt at this point she was probably doing more harm than good. But she would hear Dwayne out, and after they had several discussions about everything, Lindsay decided that she was going to continue for Dwayne, for Egypt. And I'm going to say, I am so thankful that she did. And next on her list was meeting with the detectives from the Van Buren Township Police Department herself. And spoiler alert, that did not go so well either. It was November 19th, 2018, 515 days since Egypt had been murdered, and Lindsay and Dwayne asked the Township Police Department for an update. Sit down, give them some explanations, tell them the progress of the case. They had never sat down with Dwayne before. They still hadn't even reached out to him for an interview, and you'd think, considering he's the brother of the woman you're trying to fight for, you would have compassion. No, they were not warmly welcomed. The detectives did not show them empathy. And this was recorded. Yes, it was recorded. I don't know if this was recorded by Lindsay, because at the time, Michigan was what's referred to as a one-party consent state. This means that it's not illegal to record a private conversation if the person recording is a party to that conversation, even without the consent of the other party. But it might have been gathered through the Freedom of Information Act. I'm not sure. All they wanted was an update. That should have been so easy. It's not that much to ask for. And I listened to this whole recording, and damn, were these men defensive. It was bad. There were 4 men: Director Lorraine, Lieutenant Bassis, Detective McCarthy, and the Chief of Police, Jason Wright. And the funny thing is, they wanted information from Lindsay. That's the first thing they asked. They're like, "So, any new tips? What you got for me?" Isn't that their job? After Lindsay tried to get over the fact that these men didn't even give their condolences or said they were sorry for their loss, they just acted like this was just another number on their list to check off. She explained that they are there because they want information on the suspects. They want evidence and progress in the case. And their answer was, "We're at where we're at." That's what they said. "We're at where we're at. This is where we're at. Seriously? This was blowing Lindsay's mind. She teaches kindergartners, and I'm sure that they would have more to say than these supposedly professional officers. I can't tell you every single thing that was said. I will link the interview below, and I encourage you to go check it out after all this, but I will highlight some of the most important points. It seemed like they thought it could only be 2 people, Curtis or Kenny. That's it. It was either one or the other. But Kenny was the one that they labeled as the person of interest. So when she pressed them, and she's a badass, about why they think Kenny did it, they actually say because he didn't give them good answers. He's got a lawyer and he stopped talking to them, and everybody else gave good answers that made sense and that they cooperated and that they weren't causing them to go, Wow. That's what you call some expert detective work right there. Another issue the men had was with the bar crowd, as they refer to it. They said that the bar crowd was making it hard on them, that the bar crowd was ridiculous. Lindsay wasn't following. She's like, what do you mean the bar crowd? What they meant was basically they didn't like Egypt's friends, who she hung around with, what they did for a living, because it was harder for them to do their job. Because they explained there was this close-knit town where everybody knows everyone, and they would talk. They would go wishy-washy. And then there were tips that would turn out to be nonsense. That's an investigation. That's what you have to do. They even said that Kenny's family came forward with tips, and it made them go on a wild goose chase. Well, okay, maybe they're just trying to bring up tips that would help just like everyone else. When Lindsay asked about the neighbors and their whereabouts, she gets a really weird answer. The neighbors were allegedly out of town at the music festival, right? Remember this? But then she says to the detectives, wait, did you check? Did you look at their phones, their GPS? Like, can I see that information? And they were like, well, no, we didn't need to do that. And she's stunned. She's like, you're taking their word for it? What kind of investigation is this? It seemed really effed up. Like the whole investigation had been botched and all this time had gone by. It seemed like this was a big waste of time and taxpayers' money. The answers from detectives were not to worry about the neighbors because they were just low-level potheads selling weed and ugly dogs that shit all over their place to make a buck here and there. By the way, they even said that there was no furniture in the unit, only weed and dog shit. So does that sound like a good place for a child to live? I'm not trying to be judgmental. I'm telling you, according to everything you've heard, maybe that's why CPS was called. Maybe it wasn't Dave. But remember, Chuck and Chris were sticking up for Steve. Why? There were other weird parts of the interview where they were saying things like, Egypt was the type that would fight back if she were attacked. I didn't understand what that had to do with anything, and Lindsay chimed in and argued she did not feel comfortable with them pegging Egypt a certain way as doing one thing or another because we don't know who she was faced with or what, so we can't assume anything. It doesn't matter how tough she might have been. If you're put in a certain situation, even the strongest person could cower. So during this interview, Lindsay asked if the case could be turned over to the Michigan State Police. And this immediately, you could tell, rubs them the wrong way. Totally. Of course it does. The detectives are arguing that it's their case, and the Michigan State Police don't have any more resources than they do. Really? Then they went on to brag about 8 FBI profilers that had worked Egypt's case, and all of them pointed to Kenny. When Lindsay wants the names of the profilers, they wouldn't provide them. Again, no proof. One officer said Curtis may have been an asshole to Egypt in the past, but that was many, many years ago, and they were giving their relationship another shot. He went through messages and they were in love. They were moving in together. So why would he kill his girlfriend? Oh, I don't know, but why wouldn't he? It's just a back and forth again and again. She kept pressing him again about why the Michigan State Police were not involved. It seemed like a cockfight. It just seemed like the township did not want to give up their case. They said that they can't do a better job. Lindsay asked, well, don't you think that they have more experience since they deal with more murders? It would make sense. She had done her research, and just one of the officers in the homicide department worked on 10 murders. One worked on 10 murders in 1 year. Yet these men are trying to convince them that Egypt's case is better in the township police department's hands. Lindsay called BS. During this interview, they also learned about how close Chuck was to this department. He owns a company that provides public transportation throughout different states across the U.S., pretty big business, and Chuck was into public safety. So he actually went on ride-alongs with the Van Buren Township Police Department. He knew the officers, and he thought they were great guys. So was Chuck worried about losing some kind of business contract with the city or Michigan as a whole? So maybe he didn't want to ruffle feathers, but that couldn't be it, because that was his daughter. He could have just really been bros with these guys and trusted that they were absolutely doing the best that they possibly could. But that was not good enough for Dwayne and Lindsay. There were times that I was cringing as these guys were talking about how great their polygraph technology was. It's a pseudoscience. It's not even admissible in court. It's a waste of time. But they're arguing that their polygraph guy was never wrong. After this interview, which seemed to go nowhere, except maybe getting Lindsay a job offer, that's right, the director turned to Dwayne and said, "Ooh, she's good," and said she was wasting her time being a teacher and she should join the police academy. Wow. That's right. Okay, wow. After leaving this interview, they thought they would never get a break in this case, but something wild was about to happen. Lindsay and Dwayne's goal at this point was just to get the case out of the hands of the Van Buren Township Police Department into the hands of the Michigan State Police. And by the way, just to bring some light into this entire situation, all the while Lindsay and Dwayne are growing closer and closer, and the relationship is getting stronger and stronger, as you can imagine. And finally, Dwayne proposed to Lindsay, and the ring, well, that was a ring that Egypt had always wanted when she got engaged. And without knowing it, Tina had given the ring to Dwayne to give to Lindsay, and it is a very, very special ring. I think it is exactly where it belongs, on Lindsay's finger. She now carries around a piece of Egypt wherever she goes. And it is such an honor and a reminder of a beautiful woman that was lost too soon. And at this time, there was still no arrest for Egypt's murder. Lindsay and Dwayne were 100% convinced that the Van Buren Township Police Department were wasting their time with Kenny, and they were going to do their best to prove it. They were not going to stop. They couldn't stop. They wouldn't stop. And that's actually the name of their podcast. Can't Stop, Won't Stop. They started to raise more and more awareness for her case. And at that point, they were convinced they had to go to someone higher up, because after the doozy of an interview that they had with the chief and the director and the detectives, they figured they were going to get nowhere. It was coming up on the 2nd year anniversary of Egypt's death. So the first thing they wanted to do was reach out to a local newspaper and have an article written about Egypt's story. The Belleville Area Independent was the publication. It talks about everything that's going on in Van Buren Township. It was March 25th, 2019, and wait till you hear about the drama and the unfortunate circumstances that were playing out when they tried to get Egypt's story written about. Lindsay sent an email to the township supervisor, Kevin McNamara, and the public safety director, Greg Lorraine. She explained that she had called to get the article published, and she spoke to a woman named Rosemary over the phone. Lindsay got some weird pushback because Rosemary was like, well, you know what? Chuck is for the police and Tina is against the police. Lindsay wasn't sure what that had to do with an article about Egypt. And she's like, that's not even true. And Rosemary said, well, that's what the police told me. When Lindsay snapped back and said she wanted that in writing, Rosemary hung up on her, said she wanted nothing to do with the case. The call lasted 2 minutes. Of course, Lindsay was upset. And so she wrote this email about the treatment that she was getting and experiencing from the township, and that it wasn't acceptable. Lindsay never got a response, but she was told that Rosemary was told by the police not to speak to them. On July 23rd, Dwayne reached out to who he thought was the lead detective on the case, and guess what? It turns out he's no longer working on the case. No one had even notified Egypt's family that there was someone else on Egypt's case. They didn't have the common courtesy to let them know that. They were trying to look at this as a positive thing. Maybe new eyes, fresh eyes are going to be looking through everything, but that couldn't be further from the truth. William Bettendorf, he was the new lead on the case. And there's a 20-minute phone conversation between Lindsay and him. And I'm going to tell you, I listened to the whole thing. So glad I did. But I'm not going to make you do that. I think it was worth the 20 minutes, but I'm going to paraphrase what was said and highlight the most important or damning or downright disgusting things or confusing things for all of you. The first thing I noticed was he was out of breath. He was just talking about like, oh, this case is so hard for me. And I understand that. It is hard. But as statistics are concerned, they have 2 homicides per year in this township. What could be more important than Egypt's murder? Because he was making excuses why he hadn't got to things yet. Like, oh, I'm so busy. There's so much has gone on. And so much time has gone on, but I digress. He does say that there's only 3 people working on the entire case. 3. And it's still in the best hands? So Lindsay says, you know what? You just said it was a lot of work. Don't you think that someone more experienced should help? And he blatantly says, oh yeah, the Michigan State Police, they don't want this case. Well, Lindsay was taken aback. She was like, wow, they're not interested in Egypt's case? And Lindsay, I hope you don't mind. I will always leave everything below for Lindsay's podcast. She has so much that she's done and so much work has gone into this. But I'm just here to relay all that information to all of you so that we can keep Egypt in our minds and her memory alive and the story out there. But I do want to play this one portion because I think it's really important about what was just said and what this detective's answer was about who they still think has done it. So I'm going to play it for you now.
But then everyone just keeps saying it all points to one person, but yet you've had all this information for over 2 years. Like, why won't the state take it over? What is it? What's the reason that they told you? Why don't they want it?
They're just not involved in it. They don't want to take it. It's not their case. There's no reason for the state to come and take it.
So you asked the state to come and take it, and they said, no, we want it.
They looked at it, yes, and there's nothing there they want to pursue. They feel that we've done everything that they would have done. So there's nothing new that the state would do, any different than us, and nor the FBI. We're pointed in the right direction. It's just getting enough pieces for the prosecutor to be happy.
Can we have a meeting with, how do I go about getting a meeting with you guys and the state?
The state police?
And family, yeah.
They're not going to come in. They have no reason to come in.
Well, they would if you said, hey, can you come in and talk to the family? Then they would probably maybe listen to a department that is saying, hey, we're asking for your help. We have family coming in. Can you just help us to help this family understand that we're doing everything we can?
Yeah.
Love to meet with them. I don't understand why they wouldn't do that. This is to find out who killed somebody.
You know, I really think
is there a name that you
no, there's no one at the state police. No, I've only talked to lab technicians. I haven't talked to. There's no detectives from the state police that have been assigned to this case. You know, and what
no detectives that have been signed. Right. But who did you guys talk to that said they don't want it?
I'd have to talk to McCarthy. I don't know who his contacts were at the state police. All I know is they're not interested in taking the case over. They offered their assistance with the crime lab, which they have to do. Other than that, they have no interest in picking it up. There's no reason they would want to take it. You know, because
to solve a case. I don't understand.
I understand, and I understand you're frustrated, but you got to understand at some point we're at a point where we need to get 1 or 2 more pieces and we'll be fine. But until we get that, it's.
But you guys have been there for.
I understand that. These things happen, and unfortunately, they're not always solved right away. You know,
right.
And that's just sometimes they take a long, long time. But what I'm telling you is the state police or the FBI don't have any ability to do anything we haven't done already. There's nothing they can come in and do that we haven't done. You know, so they have no more leverage.
I feel for you, Lindsay. I know how frustrating this must have been. The next couple of minutes, they talked about the polygraph again, going back and forth about whether it was inconclusive or whether he failed miserably. It's just, again, who cares? It's pointless. It can't even be used. And then he goes on to mention the FBI, just like the other officers had mentioned before. And now talking about how the FBI agents say that there's only one person that had a clear motive to do this. It's like, really? You've exhausted every single person? Every person, like the 200,000 people that came through to the Strawberry Festival. You've really gone through every single person that could have had a motive? This is shocking information. And what was that motive? The recent breakup and the new boyfriend. But it also kind of seems like they don't even have information. They keep saying the same thing and going into circles about why Kenny is the one that they want to focus on. And Lindsay makes a good point. She's like, okay, guys, you've had this information for over 2 years. What's going on? What's stopping you from arresting him? Then she asked one more time, can't the state police just take the case? And that's when he blatantly says, oh, they've looked at it. And they didn't have any interest in it at all. It really made me sad. It's just the way that he said it. Like they have no reason to want this case. It's not a case, it's a person. I just can't imagine listening to that being it my daughter or my mother or sister. It's a person. Hearing that somebody doesn't care. It's just insensitive and heartless. And I understand there are people that lose their lives every day. And I know that a lot of resources go into it and maybe they don't think anyone is special. But when you lose someone, they are special. And seriously, literally at the end of this conversation, you know what he says? We just have to take the wait and see approach. Sounds like he doesn't plan to do anything with the case. What does that mean for the family? They're just going to sit there and wait? There was another interesting thing in the interview. She asked them, because she heard this, she asked them why Steve had told her, the Van Buren Township Police Department don't fuck with me. Seems like they don't. Seems like they kind of cover for Steve or, let things get swept under the rug for him. So she asked why. It turns out, and I didn't want to go into this, but Steve had tried to get Dave put in jail. The private investigator? Yeah. He had tried to bring charges against him and it went all the way to court. It was embarrassing. And none of those charges ever stuck or anything. But why? Was something drug-related going on? They didn't know. But Lindsay just wants to know. Like, it could be anyone related to this case. Why are we just not looking into certain people? She starts to give them theories. She says, well, there were a lot of people going in and out. How do we know that one of those people that were picking up drugs didn't see Egypt and get infatuated with her and then come back when they knew the neighbors were going out of town? How do we know that? Maybe they knew her schedule. Maybe they went there to do her harm or to take advantage of her. We don't know. Who is this Steve guy, and why would he make a statement that the police don't fuck with him? And why try to protect a man like that? It just seems like something doesn't add up. So they made a Facebook page called Justice for Egypt, the Truth Behind the Investigation. It was August 2019, 26 months after Egypt's murder, and their mission for this group was for the community to come together and find justice. Any tips, anything like that. And this came in handy because something crazy was about to happen. I don't know. I find this to be very interesting. And all they wanted to do was get the case out of the township's hands and into the state police hands. That's what they wanted. And as soon as Lindsay starts to share things in the Facebook group, you know how it spreads like wildfire. Everyone wants to know. Now the community is taking notice. They're starting to become concerned because she's sharing everything. Everything that you just heard, that's what she was sharing. They were starting to think about things in a different light. They were upset. They didn't think they were being protected by their police department. So on September 9th, 2019, all of the hard work is paid off because they get an interview with a detective first lieutenant from the Michigan State Police. And I'm not going to go into this whole interview. The most important thing for you to take away from this is that he says he had talked to the Township Police Department a number of times and literally asked them if they needed help, and they said no. They declined not once, not twice, not 3 times, but a number of times. They offered him 12 men to come in and work on Egypt's case, so it was a lie. Would you want liars working on your case? Because that 20-minute conversation, Lindsay got it under the Freedom of Information Act, and she gave it to this first lieutenant from the Michigan State Police. So after this meeting, they wanted to get a petition signed. They wanted people to come forward and ask the Van Buren Township Police to hand over Egypt's case to the Michigan State Police. They got 14,000 people to sign this petition. Believe it or not, Egypt's own family, one of her sisters, her stepmom, and some of her friends, they did not like this. They pushed back. They were making public Facebook posts asking people not to sign the petition. In all caps, with like 10 exclamation points, like, do not sign this. You're going to do more damage than good. You don't realize what you're doing. It's based on lies. This was such a back and forth all the time. There were even threats like, if you sign this and something happens, it's going to be your fault, to that effect. You know what I'm saying? It was just, the family they were divided. Like I said, the great divide. I'm just going to be straight up. If it wasn't for Lindsay and Dwayne, I don't think this case would have gotten as far as it did. Because wait till you hear what happens next and where everything stands. And who did this to Egypt. Because some of Egypt's family members even accused Lindsay of doing this for attention. Can you imagine that? The attention that they were trying to get was on Egypt. She was reaching out to everyone, podcasters, probably YouTubers, who knows. She was going to all media outlets and they didn't even want to talk to her at first. Lindsay doesn't win a prize. Nobody wins anything. We can never bring Egypt back, but we can bring the person that did this to justice. That's what we can do. And that's what Lindsay wanted to do. So call it luck or something else, but there's finally a break in the case, and it's persistence. Maybe like Lindsay said, can't stop, won't stop. She started to CC that head lieutenant of the state police on every email that she would send to the Van Buren Police Department. She would CC the state police every time, again and again and again. She was doing this because she wanted to be annoying. She wanted to be the persistent person that they just wanted to get rid of and say, hand the case to the Michigan State Police, we're tired of it. They were doing everything they could. They were showing up at, the town council meetings on Zoom, because now at this point we're going into 2020 and it's COVID-19 and that whole thing, but they were persistent. Anytime there was any kind of meeting in town over Zoom, they were there. You couldn't get rid of Lindsay and Dwayne. And they would ask questions every time regarding Egypt's case, and months went by. Every single chance they got, they just kept pushing and pestering the local authorities again and again, criticizing the local police and trying to get the investigation moved. They never got responses. Never. Nobody seemed to care. They just wanted to ignore them and hope they would go away. But then one day something happened. Dwayne says to Lindsay, oh my God, did you see the email that we just got back from the town clerk? And she's like, no. What do you mean? And he's like, guess what? They accidentally responded thinking they were only responding to the local officials, but not to Dwayne. And somehow Dwayne was still left on the response. Can you believe that? Okay, so the town clerk had meant to remove the family members from his response before hitting send, but he forgot. And you know what he said? Is there any way these emails to everyone can be blocked? I'm personally not interested in the stupidness. The stupidness. These were emails about Egypt, a woman that was murdered in their town. I think we can all agree it's not stupidness. And of course, you know what Lindsay did. She took that email and she put it everywhere. She put it on Facebook pages. She put it on the township pages. She gave it to the state police. That's right. Here was the county clerk. This is what they think of an unsolved murder of an innocent woman named Egypt Covington. This created a shitstorm. And even though the clerk apologized, saying, oh, I didn't mean any disrespect to Egypt. I really just didn't want to be on a chain of emails. Well, it doesn't matter. There was a public protest, a march that was held by Lindsay and Dwayne. And just one day afterward, guess who reaches out? It actually kind of brings tears to my eyes. The Michigan State Police. It was the lead detective on the case, and he reached out to Lindsay and Dwayne, and when she heard who it was, she was like, does this mean that you have our case? And he said yes. They were so excited. They couldn't help but cry, and these were tears of joy. This is exactly what they wanted. And it was so emotional. It was November of 2020, and it had been more than 3 years that had gone by. And it was finally in the hands of the Michigan State Police. And they figured they waited this long, they're probably going to have to wait a long time before anything new happens in this case. But just a little over 3 months later, they got some very big but very unexpected information. They were informed that an arrest had been made. This was huge. Everyone that was getting the news about this arrest had their head spinning. Who was it? Is it Kenny? Nobody knew. Well, Lindsay wanted to find out whether it was Kenny. So she called Kenny, and when he answered the phone, she realized Kenny's not in jail, so it's not Kenny. So who was arrested? There was no other information. They just had to wait, and it turns out the Michigan State Police gave names of the suspects, 3 of them. This added so much more confusion because when they gave the names of these men who had been arrested, no one knew who they were. These names came out in the final weeks of 2021. Shane Evans, Timothy Moore, and Shandon Groom. They were arrested and charged in the murder of Egypt Covington. The names meant nothing to Egypt's friends and family. This was a small town where everyone knew each other. So who were these men? It was confusing. In March of this year, 2022, all 3 of them appeared on a Zoom call, a preliminary hearing. The biggest question that everyone wanted to know was how and what happened. Why would these men want to hurt her? The prosecution laid out their case on this pretrial hearing, and an entirely new story started to emerge. One that I still cannot wrap my brain around. And this is an ongoing case. Dare I say it's an unsolved murder because these men have not gone to trial. And all 3 of these men are related. Shane and Timothy are brothers, and Shandon is their cousin. Well, guess what? One of them knew Egypt. Shane Evans. They had gone to high school together. But there was something else. Remember Steve and Megan? Well, Steve had actually hired Shane to cut the lawn. What lawn? The lawn in front of the duplex. Who lives in the duplex? Steve, Megan, their child, and Egypt Covington. Shane saw Egypt all the time because he was there to cut the grass. How did all of this connect? Well, police said that they ran video surveillance tapes and they saw a Dodge Ram that was entering a nearby parking lot, and they connected this truck to these men. That truck was seen at a gas station that was right in Egypt's duplex vicinity on the night she was killed. They wanted to know what happened, so they brought Shane Evans in. And the story that he told seems unreal, unbelievable, especially to me. This is what I don't understand, and you'll have to piece this together yourself and leave it in the comments because I am still so confused. Shane said that his brother and his cousin that live all the way in Toledo, they were in town that night and they wanted some weed. Just wanted to have a little smoke out. Shane says, well, I know someone who sells it. I cut his lawn. But unfortunately, he's out of town this weekend for a music festival. So I guess you're just going to have to wait. Well, here's the thing. When has it ever been hard to get weed? I don't know. You tell me, because this was Chuck's argument, and I have to agree. He said it's not hard to get weed in Michigan, but Shane is adamant that his brother and his cousin said, you know what? We'll just go to Steve's house and we'll get it ourselves. We'll let ourselves in and we'll take what we want and leave. So according to Shane, he had them follow him in their truck. Shane's in front, driving past Egypt's duplex. They're driving behind. He uses his hand, he points out the window, and he points to the duplex and says, it's the unit on the right. That's where he directed them to go according to his story. The story goes on that these men, instead of going into the unit on the right, they end up going into the unit on the left, Egypt Covington's unit. These 2 men came in, men she had never met her entire life, and according to prosecutors, she was watching a movie. They bound her with Christmas lights, and they shot her 1 time through a couch cushion into the head and killed her. Why? If you were going to steal weed from a neighbor, why would you end up killing an innocent woman? Shane later tells police that his brother sent him a text. Timothy said, oops, wrong door. That's all the text said. Heartless. Inhumane. Oops, wrong door.
He just texts wrong door. Yeah. Just those 2 words, wrong door. He said, hey man, nope, we just hit wrong door. Wrong door, that's a wrong door. Okay, whoops. Whoops, wrong door. Whoops, wrong door.
Do you believe that all it took was them going into the wrong unit, for Egypt to lose her life, that nothing else was going on, that there's no other connections, even though Shane knew her. Of course, they have a defense. And they're already trying to say that the videos were bad and you can't really read the license plate and you can't prove they were there, but there's enough evidence for them to go to trial. And the best piece of evidence were their cell phones. Apparently, their cell phones were at Egypt's place for a matter of minutes, and then Egypt's phone and their phones go in the same direction until Egypt's phone is discarded of. So they were there. A lot has been done by people like Lindsay and, of course, Egypt's family, keeping her memory alive. There was actually a beer that was created, and it's called A Girl Named Egypt. I wanted to showcase that on screen, and Chuck also set up a fund in Egypt's name to help kids learn how to play musical instruments. Not only that, a monument was set up in town, in Belleville, and the inscription comes right from Egypt's journal. All of this information that I've given you is everything that I've heard and that I've tried to piece together. And here are some of my own thoughts. I am not a detective. This is not a court of law. This is a YouTube video. I do this so that we can remember someone that was taken from this earth, Egypt Covington. I feel so bad for her entire family. And I know there's been a lot of drama in this case. There's a lot of different perspectives. And I mean no harm to anyone. I'm just here to gather information. And I'm getting all of this from what's readily available online. I will say that Lindsay has decided to pause her podcast for now out of the respect for the family and the sensitive information that could be detrimental to this case in some way. And she's going to restart it when the trial has concluded. And I totally understand that. I'm going to give you all of those links in my description box, but I wanted to give a reason that this could possibly have been a random crime. It's going to be quick, but you have to understand that criminals don't think like we do. My father is a criminal. I've grown up listening to his stories. When someone is already in a mindset, we don't know if they were on drugs. We have nothing to go on right now. But if they were on other substances, you're not in your right mind regardless. If you are a criminal, you have a criminal mind. That's why they call it a criminal mind. If you're hyped up and you go in and you've already got charges on you, because just so you know, they do have criminal records. One of them, I think the main person that's being charged who had the gun and committed the crime already had a criminal record, and he could be put away for a long time. And you would think, isn't the reasonable thing to do not to commit an even greater crime? But in that moment, in that split second, when you think no one's there, when you think no one will care, when you're a criminal and you're thinking more about yourself in that split second, you do make these kind of decisions. It could have been all about marijuana. It seems like it is just horrific to think and unbelievable to assume that this could have just been a wrong door. And when we talked about the Christmas lights, the only thing that could come to my mind was that she was moving. If there were boxes set up, things were in those boxes, and there was one labeled Christmas, and Christmas lights were there and easily accessible, when you are trying to hold someone down who might be screaming, who might be fighting, you tell your buddy, hey, grab something. Right now, there's cords all around me. If I had cords wrapped around my hands, terrible thought, it's because they might have been readily available in the moment to get me to stop when people are trying to hold me down. That is my theory. This is an ongoing investigation. This is an ongoing case. This is all that I know so far. And I'm providing all this information so that we can stand by and stand for Egypt. I know this has been a long case. It is very convoluted. It is still ongoing. I will leave so many sources below. Please give me your thoughts. There is just a lot to be said here. Egypt, you are loved. You'll never be forgotten. Thank you so very much for watching this video. I really appreciate it. I will see you in my next one. Bye.